Today we're going to read the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition Dungeon Master's Guide. We're going to read the introduction and the first chapter on player abilities. If you followed along with the previous video, we read the AD&D 2nd Edition Player's Handbook introduction and first chapter on player character abilities. So we're going to follow it up today with the corresponding chapter in the DMG, and let's begin. I loved the artwork in these books. I think I mentioned that in the last video. This cover was iconic to my, to growing up and thinking about role-playing games and playing role-playing games on the Nintendo and computer. I just always wanted to be a wizard fighting a big dragon like this. This was awesome. And when I thought about playing AD&D and Middle-earth role-playing, that's exactly what I wanted to do. So this was a really cool cover, I thought. This newly revised and updated version of the AD&D game provides everything Dungeon Masters need to create thrilling role-playing challenges for intermediate through advanced players ages 10 and up. This is the complete guide to being an AD&D game Dungeon Master, whether you're running a single adventure or masterminding a complete fantasy campaign. The Dungeon Master's Guide is an absolute necessity. The 2nd Edition Dungeon Master's Guide puts all the information you need right at your fingertips in a new, fresh format, fully indexed for your convenience. Here you'll learn all there is to know about magical spells and items, as well as monsters, combat, travel, NPCs, treasure, encounters, awarding experience, and more. So just like the Player's Handbook, let's read the foreword, look at the table of contents, and then we'll read the introduction and the first chapter of the book. A foreword is normally the place where the author of a book expresses thanks and gratitude. I'm not going to do that here. It's not that everyone involved doesn't deserve congratulations and praise. It's just that I already said all those things in the foreword to the AD&D 2nd Edition Player's Handbook. Everything I said there is true for this book too. On to other things. Let's assume that since you're reading this, you are or plan to be a dungeon master. By now you should be familiar with the rules in the Player's Handbook. You've probably already noticed things you like or things you would have done differently. If you have, congratulations. You've got the spirit every dungeon master needs. Curiosity and the desire to make changes. To do things differently because your idea is better than the other guy's. These are the most important things a dungeon master needs. As you go through this rulebook, I encourage you to continue to make these choices. Choice is what the 2nd edition is all about. We've tried to offer you what we think are the best choices for your AD&D campaign, but each of us has different likes and dislikes. The game that I enjoy may be quite different from your own campaign, but it is not for me to say what is right or wrong for your game. True, I and everyone working on the 2nd edition have had to make fundamental decisions, but we've tried to avoid being dogmatic and inflexible. The AD&D game is yours, it's mine, it's every player's game. So is there an official AD&D game? Yes, but only when there needs to be. Although I don't have a crystal ball, it's likely that tournaments and other official events will use all of the core rules in these books. Optional rules may or may not be used, but it's fair to say that all players need to know about them even if they don't have them memorized. The Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide give you what you're expected to know, but that doesn't mean the game begins and ends there. Your game will go in directions not yet explored, and your players will try things others think strange. Sometimes these strange things will work out, sometimes they won't. Just accept this, be ready for it, and enjoy it. Take the time to have fun with the AD&D rules. Add, create, expand, and extrapolate. Don't just let the game sit there, and don't become a rules lawyer worrying about each piddly little detail. If you can't figure out the answer, make it up. And whatever you do, don't fall into the trap of believing these rules are complete. They are not. You cannot sit back and let the rulebook do everything for you. Take the time and effort to become not just a good DM, but a brilliant one. At conventions, in letters, and over the phone, I'm often asked for the instant answer to a fine point of the game rules. More often than not, I come back with a question. What do you feel is right? And the people asking the questions discover that not only can they create an answer, but that their answer is as good as anyone else's. The rules are only guidelines. At the beginning of the first Dungeon Master's Guide, Gary Gygax stressed that each of us, working from a common base, would make the AD&D game grow in a variety of different directions. That is more true today than ever. Don't be afraid of experimentation, but do be careful. As a Dungeon Master, you have a great power, and with great power comes great responsibility. Use it wisely. David Zeb Cook, February 9th, 1989. So here's a table of contents, and again, it mirrors the player's handbook table of contents, starting with an introduction, and then a first chapter on player character abilities, going into player character races, player character classes, alignment, proficiencies, which is an optional rule, money and equipment, magic, experience, combat, treasure and magical items, encounters, NPCs or non-player characters, vision and light, time and movement, a DM's miscellany, treasure tables in the appendix, appendix 2 magical item tables, appendix 3 magical item descriptions, the index, and a list of all the tables contained in the book. Introduction. You are one of a very special group of people, AD&D game dungeon masters. Your job is not easy. It requires wit, imagination, and the ability to think and act extemporaneously. A really good dungeon master is essential to a good game. The Dungeon Master's Guide is reserved for dungeon masters. Discourage players from reading the book, and certainly don't let players consult it during the game, for 2 reasons. First, as long as players don't know exactly what's in the Dungeon Master's Guide, they'll always wonder what you know that they don't. It doesn't matter whether you have secret information. Even if you don't, as long as the players think you do, their sense of mystery and uncertainty is maintained. Second, this book does contain essential rules that are not discussed in the player's handbook. Some of these players will learn quickly during play. Special combat situations, the costs of hiring NPCs, etc. Others, however, cover more esoteric or mysterious situations, the nature of artifacts and other magical items, for example. This information is in the Dungeon Master's Guide, so the DM can control the players and hence the characters' access to it. In a fantasy world, as in this world, information is power. What the characters don't know can hurt them, or lead them on a merry chase to nowhere. While the players aren't your enemies, they aren't your allies, and you aren't obligated to give anything away for nothing. If characters go hunting were-rats without doing any research beforehand, feel free to throw lots of curves their way. Reward those characters who take the time to do some checking beforehand. Besides rules, you'll find that a large portion of this book is devoted to discussions of the thinking and the principles behind the rules. Along with this are examinations of the pros and cons of changing the rules to fit your campaign. The purpose of this book, after all, is to better prepare you for your role as game moderator and referee. The better you understand the game, the better equipped you'll be to handle unforeseen developments and unusual circumstances. One of the principles guiding this project from the very beginning, and which is expressed throughout the book, is this: the DM has primary responsibility for the success of his campaign, and he must take an active hand in guiding it. That is an important concept. If you are skimming through this introduction, slow down and read it again. It's crucial that you understand what you are getting into. Let's read that again. The DM has primary responsibility for the success of his campaign, and he must take an active hand in guiding it. The DM's active hand extends even to the rules. Many decisions about your campaign can be made by only one person, you. Each DM must tailor his campaign to fit his own style and the style of his players. You won't find pat answers to all your questions in this book. Certainly, you will find a lot of information, but it doesn't include solutions to all your game problems. Sometimes a single answer just isn't appropriate. In those cases, what you will find instead is a discussion of the problem and numerous triggers intended to guide you through a thoughtful analysis of the situation as it pertains to your campaign. The rules to the 2nd edition AD&D game are balanced and easy to use. No role-playing game we know of has ever been play-tested more heavily than this one, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. What we consider to be right may be unbalanced or anachronistic in your campaign. The only thing that can make the AD&D game right for all players is the intelligent application of DM discretion. A perfect example of this is the limit placed on experience levels for demi-humans. A lot of people complained that these limits were too low. We agreed, and we raised the limits. The new limits were tested, examined, and adjusted until we decided they were right. But you may be one of the few people who prefer the older, lower limits, or you may think there should be no limits at all. In the chapter on character classes, you'll find a discussion of this topic that considers the pros and cons of level limits. We don't ask you to blindly accept every limit we've established, but we do ask that before you make any changes, you read this chapter and carefully consider what you are about to do. If after weighing the evidence you decide that a change is justified in your game, by all means make the change. In short, follow the rules as they are written if doing so improves your game, but by the same token, break the rules only if doing so improves your game. A word about organization. Everything in this book is based on the assumption that you own and are familiar with the Player's Handbook. To make your job easier, the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide have parallel organization. Chapters appear in the same order in both books. That means that if you know where to find something in the Player's Handbook, you also know where to find it in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Also, the index in this book covers both the DMG and the Player's Handbook. You can find all the references to any specific topic by checking this index. The fine art of being a DM. Being a good Dungeon Master involves a lot more than knowing the rules. It calls for quick wit, theatrical flair, and a good sense of dramatic timing, among other things. Most of us can claim these attributes to some degree, but there's always room for improvement. Fortunately, skills like these can be learned and improved with practice. There are hundreds of tricks, shortcuts, and simple principles that can make you a better, more dramatic, and more creative game master. But you won't find them in the Dungeon Master's Guide. This is a reference book for running the AD&D game. We tried to minimize material that doesn't pertain to the immediate conduct of the game. If you are interested in reading more about this aspect of refereeing, we refer you to Dragon Magazine, published monthly by TSR Incorporated. Dragon Magazine is devoted to role-playing in general and the AD&D game in particular. For over 10 years, Dragon Magazine has published articles on every facet of role-playing. It is invaluable for DMs and players alike. If you have never played a role-playing game before but are eager to learn, our advice from the Player's Handbook is still the best. Find a group of people who already play the game and join them for a few sessions. If that is impractical for some reason, the best alternative is to get a copy of the Dungeons & Dragons basic game. The Dungeons & Dragons game is a less detailed role-playing game. The D&D basic set includes an introductory role-playing adventure that you can play by yourself. This will show you what goes on during the game and give you step-by-step instructions on how to set up and run a game with your friends. Again, look at this art. The artwork in these books was fantastic at the time. I remember this page from when I was a kid and just thinking, oh, these adventures are going to get it now. The demon whose treasure they're stealing is about to get them, and this one adventure, this thief doesn't even know what's going to happen. Yeah, I just like the art throughout these books a lot. Chapter 1: Player Character Ability Scores. Each player is responsible for creating his player character. As the DM, however, your decisions have a huge impact on the process. Furthermore, you have final approval over any player character that is created. This chapter outlines what you should consider about character creation and give guidelines on how to deal with some of the common problems that arise during character creation. Giving players what they want. Players in most AD&D games play the same character over many game sessions. Most players develop strong ties to their characters and get a huge thrill from watching them advance, grow, and become more successful and powerful. A lot of your game's success depends on how much your players care about their characters. For these reasons, it's important to let each player create the type of character he really wants to play. At the same time, watch out for a tendency in some players to want the most powerful character possible. Powerful characters are fine if that's the sort of campaign you want. A problem arises, however, if players are allowed to exploit the rules or your good nature to create a character who is much more powerful than everyone else's character. At best, this leads to an unbalanced game, at worst, to bored players and hurt feelings. Therefore, before any player in your game creates his first character, decide which dice rolling method to allow. Will you allow method 1, any of the 5 alternative methods, or a 7th method of your own devising? Be prepared with an answer right away, because this is one of the first questions your players will ask. Choosing a character creation method. Despite some similarities, the methods are different from one another. Some produce more powerful characters than others, although none produce extremely powerful characters. For this reason, every player in your game should start out using the same method. If at some later point in your campaign you want to change methods, simply announce this to your players. Try to avoid making the announcement just as a player starts rolling up a new character, lest the other players accuse you of favoritism. You know you aren't playing favorites, but it doesn't hurt to avoid the appearance. The advantages and disadvantages of each dice rolling method are described below. Also see page 13 of the Player's Handbook. 5 sample characters created with each method illustrate typical outcomes the different methods are likely to produce. Method 1. 3d6 in order. This is the fastest and most straightforward method. There are no decisions to make while rolling the dice, and dice rolling is kept to a minimum. Ability scores range from 3 to 18, but the majority will fall in a range from 9 to 12. Typically, a character will have 4 scores in the average range, 1 below average score and 1 above average score. A few lucky players will get several high scores, and a few unlucky ones will get just the opposite. Very high scores are rare, so character classes that require high scores, Paladin, Ranger, Illusionist, Druid, and Bard, are correspondingly rare. This makes characters who qualify for those classes very special indeed. The majority of the player characters will be fighters, clerics, mages, and thieves. Characters with exceptional ability scores will tend to stand out from their comrades. Method 1 disadvantages. This method has 2 disadvantages. First, some players may consider their characters to be hopelessly average. Second, the players don't get many choices. Using Method 1, only luck enables a player to get a character of a particular type, since he has no control over the dice. Most characters have little choice over which class they become. Only 1 or 2 options will be open to them. You may have to let players discard a character who is totally unsuitable and start over. Table 1, Method 1 characters. So 5 characters rolled up, random stats placed into each ability as they're rolled. Character 1, Strength 10, Dexterity 8, Constitution 12, Intelligence 13, Wisdom 12, Charisma 7. The suggested class is Mage, since they have a 13 in Intelligence. Character number 2 rolled an 8 in Strength, a 7 in Dexterity, an 8 in Constitution, an 8 in Intelligence, a 10 in Wisdom, a 12 in Charisma, and the recommended class is a Cleric. Character 3 rolled a 13 in Strength, an 8 in Dexterity, a 9 in Constitution, a 14 in Intelligence, an 11 in Wisdom, and a 14 in Charisma. And the suggested classes are either a Fighter, because of the 13 in Strength, or a Mage, because of the 14 in Intelligence. Character number 4 rolled a 6 in Strength, a 15 in Dexterity, a 10 in Constitution, a 9 in Intelligence, a 9 in Wisdom, and a 7 in Charisma. Suggested class is a Thief because of the 15 in Dexterity. Character number 5 rolled a 16 in Strength, a 10 in Dexterity, a 14 in Constitution, a 12 in Intelligence, a 13 in Wisdom, and an 8 in Charisma. And they are suggesting a class of Fighter for that 16 in Strength. Method 2. 3d6 twice, keep desired score. This method gives players better scores without introducing serious ability inflation. It also gives them more control over their characters. The average ability is still in the 9 to 12 range, and players can manipulate their results to bring the characters they create closer to the ideal characters they imagine. Exceptional player characters are still rare, and unusual character classes are still uncommon, but few characters will have below average scores. Method 2 disadvantages. Creating the character takes slightly longer because there are more dice to roll. Despite the improved choices, a character may still not be eligible for the race or class the player wants. Table 2, Method 2 characters. Character 1 chose a 12 for Strength, a 10 for Dexterity, an 11 for Constitution, 13 for Intelligence, a 16 for Wisdom, a 10 for Charisma, and the suggested class is a Cleric. Character 2 rolled and chose an 11 for Strength, a 15 for Dexterity, an 11 for Constitution, an 11 for Intelligence, a 13 for Wisdom, an 11 for Charisma, and the suggested class is Thief because of that 15 in Dexterity. Character number 3 rolled a 9 for Strength, 12 for Dexterity, 16 for Constitution, 12 for Intelligence, 13 for Wisdom, and 14 for Charisma. Suggested class is a cleric again. Character number 4 rolled a 9 for strength, a 13 for dexterity, a 14 for constitution, a 13 for intelligence, an 11 for wisdom, and a 9 for charisma. And because of that 13 in intelligence, the suggested class is a mage. Number 5 rolled a 15 for strength, 14 for dexterity, a 14 for constitution, 14 for intelligence, a 13 for wisdom, a 12 for charisma, and the suggested class is a fighter because of that 15 in strength and 14 in constitution. Method 3, 3d6 arranged to taste. This method gives the player more choice when creating his characters, yet still ensures that overall ability scores are not excessive. Bad characters are still possible, especially if a player has several poor rolls. The majority of characters have average abilities. Since players can arrange their scores however they want, it is easier to meet the requirements for an unusual class. Classes with exceptionally strict standards, the Paladin in particular, are still uncommon. Method 3, disadvantages. This method is more time-consuming than method 1 or 2, especially if players try to min-max their choice of race or class. To min-max or minimize-maximize is to examine every possibility for the greatest advantage. Players may need to be encouraged to create the character they see in their imaginations, not the one that gains the most pluses on a dice roll. The example below shows fighters created using method 3. Table 3, method 3 characters. So fighter 1 rolled 11, 15, 7, 8, 7, 15, put a 15 in strength, an 11 in dexterity, a 15 in constitution, a 7 in intelligence, an 8 in wisdom, and a 7 in charisma. Fighter 2 rolled a 12, 8, 7, 13, 13, and 12, put a 13 in strength, a 12 in dexterity, another 13 in constitution, an 8 in intelligence, a 7 in wisdom, and the final 12 in charisma. Fighter number 3 put a 14 in strength, a 9 in dexterity, a 13 in constitution, an 8 in intelligence, a 7 in wisdom, and a 7 in charisma. Fighter number 4 rolled a 12, a 9, a 6, a 10, a 7, and a 15, placed a 15 in strength, 10 in dexterity, 12 in constitution, 9 in intelligence, 6 in wisdom, and 7 in charisma. Fighter number 5 rolled a 12, 2 14s, 2 11s, and a 9, placed a 14 in strength, a 12 in dexterity, another 14 in constitution, an 11 in intelligence, a 9 in wisdom, and the second 11 in charisma. Method number 4, 3d6 twice, arranged to taste. This method has all the benefits of methods 2 and 3. Few, if any, characters are likely to have poor scores. Most scores are above average. The individual score ranges are still not excessively high, so truly exceptional characters are still very rare. However, the majority of characters are significantly above the norm. Method 4, disadvantages. This method tends to be quite slow. Players spend a lot of time comparing different numbers combinations with the requirements of different races and classes. New players can easily be overwhelmed by the large number of choices during the process. Again, the examples below are arranged for fighters. Table 4, Method 4 characters. Fighter number 1 plays a 15 in strength, a 13 in dexterity, a 13 in constitution, a 13 in intelligence, a 13 in wisdom, and a 10 in charisma. Fighter number 2 plays a 14 in strength, a 10 in dexterity, a 12 in constitution, a 9 in intelligence, a 9 in wisdom, and a 9 in charisma. Fighter number 3 plays a 15 in strength, a 13 in dexterity, a 15 in constitution, a 13 in intelligence, and an 11 in both wisdom and charisma. Fighter number 4 plays a 16 in strength, a 15 in dexterity and constitution, a 12 in intelligence, and a 13 in both wisdom and charisma. Fighter number 5 plays a 15 in strength, a 13 in dexterity, a 15 in constitution, a 13 in intelligence, and a 12 in each of wisdom and charisma. Method 5, 4d6, drop lowest, arrange as desired. Before choosing to use this method, think about how adventurers fit into the population as a whole. There are two schools of thought on this issue. One school of thought holds that adventurers are no different from everyone else except for being a little more foolhardy, headstrong, or restless. The man or woman down the street could be an adventurer. All that's required is the desire to go out and be one. Therefore, adventurers should not get special bonuses on their ability rolls. The other school holds that adventurers are special people. a cut above the common crowd. If they weren't exceptional, they would be laborers and businessmen like everyone else. Player characters are heroes, so they should get bonuses on their ability rolls to lift them above the rabble. If you choose Method 5 for creating player characters, then you agree with the second view and believe that adventurers should be better than everyone else. This method creates above average characters. They won't be perfect, but the odds are that even their worst ability scores will be average or better. More scores push into the exceptional range, 15 and greater. It is easy for a player to create a character of any class and race. Method 5, Disadvantages. Like other methods that allow deliberate arrangement of ability scores, this one takes some time. It also creates a tendency towards super characters without getting out of hand. This can be a problem if your campaign isn't geared toward that sort of thing. Unless you have a considerable amount of experience as a DM, however, beware of extremely powerful characters. They are much more difficult to challenge and control than characters of moderate power. On the plus side, their chance of survival at their lower levels is better than ordinary characters. See super characters below for more on the subject. One last point about Method 5. High ability scores are less exciting under this method, since they are much more common, as the fighter characters below indicate. Table 5, Method 5 characters. Fighter 1 has a 17 in strength, a 14 in dexterity, 15 in constitution, a 13 in intelligence, a 13 in wisdom, and a 9 in charisma. Fighter 2 has a 15 in strength, a 14 in dexterity, a 14 in constitution, an 11 in intelligence, a 10 in wisdom, and a 13 in charisma. Fighter 3 rolled an 18 and then a 37 on the percentile dice in strength, a 13 in dexterity, a 14 in constitution, a 10 in intelligence, an 11 in wisdom, and 8 in charisma. Fighter 4 has a 16 in strength, a 15 in dexterity, a 15 in constitution, a 14 in intelligence, a 15 in wisdom, a 7 in charisma. Fighter 5 has a 14 in strength, a 12 in dexterity, a 17 in constitution, an 8 in intelligence and wisdom, and a 9 in charisma. So overall, higher scores than normal, but still a few low scores there with the 9s, 8s, and 7s. Method 6, Points plus Dice. This gives players more control over their characters than any of the other methods. A points system makes it quite likely that a player can get the character he wants, or at least the class and race. However, in doing so, the player must make some serious compromises. It is unlikely that the dice are going to be good enough to make every score as high as he would like. In all likelihood, only 1 or 2 ability scores will be exceptional, and miserable dice rolling could lower this even further. The player must carefully weigh the pros and cons of his choices when creating the character. Method 6, Disadvantages. This method works best for experienced players. Players who are not familiar with the different character classes and races have a hard time making the necessary and difficult decisions. Table 6 shows fighters constructed using this method. Table 6, Method 6 characters. Fighter 1 has an 18 with a percentile of 15 in strength, a 12 in dexterity, a 12 in constitution, an 11 in intelligence, a 9 in wisdom, and 8 in charisma. Fighter 2 has a 15 in strength, an 11 in dexterity, a 9 in constitution, a 9 in intelligence, a 9 in wisdom, and an 8 in charisma. Fighter 3 has a 16 in strength, 11 in dexterity, a 12 in constitution, a 10 in intelligence, a 10 in wisdom, and a 9 in charisma. Fighter 4 has an 18 in strength with a percentile of 71, a 13 in dexterity, an 18 in constitution, an 11 in intelligence, an 8 in wisdom, a 9 in charisma. And Fighter 5 has a 17 in strength, a 12 in dexterity, a 14 in constitution, an 11 in intelligence, a 10 in wisdom, and a 13 in charisma. Super characters. One of the great temptations for players is to create super characters. While this is not true of every player all the time, the desire for power above everything else afflicts most players at one time or another. Many players see their characters as nothing more than a collection of numbers that affects game systems. They don't think of their characters as personalities to be developed. Players like this want to win the game somehow. These players are missing out on a lot of fun. If players are creating new characters for your campaign, you probably won't have to deal with such super characters. Players can start with ability scores greater than 18 only if the race grants a bonus. but this is extremely rare. Later in the campaign, magic may raise ability scores higher. The greatest difficulty occurs when a player asks to bring in a character from another campaign where characters are more powerful. Unless you are prepared to handle them, super characters can seriously disrupt a campaign. Players with average characters gradually become bored or irritated as the powerful characters dominate the game. Players with powerful characters feel held back by their weaker companions. None of this contributes to harmony and cooperation among the characters or players. Cooperation is a key element of role-playing. In any group of player characters, everyone has strengths to contribute and weaknesses to overcome. This is the basis for the adventuring party. Even a small group with sufficiently diverse talents can accomplish deeds far greater than its size would indicate. Now throw in a character who is an army by himself. He doesn't need the other characters except perhaps as cannon fodder or bearers. He doesn't need allies. His presence alone destroys one of the most fundamental aspects of the game, cooperation. Identifying two powerful characters. There are no absolute rules to define a too powerful character. Since the definition will vary from campaign to campaign, characters who are average in your game may be weaklings in your friend's campaign. His characters, in turn, could be frail compared to some other groups. Some experience is required to strike the right balance of power, but characters created using the same method should at least be comparable. When someone brings a character from a different campaign and wants to use him in your game, compare the proposed character to those already in the game. You don't want him to be too strong or too weak. Certainly you should be wary of a character whose ability scores are all 18s. Dealing with two powerful characters. If you decide a character is too powerful, the player has two choices. First, he can agree to weaken the character in some fashion, subject to your approval. This may be as simple as excluding a few magical items. No, you can't bring that Holy Avenger's sword +5 that shoots 30 dice fireballs into my campaign. Second, the player can agree not to use some special ability. I don't care if your previous DM gave your character the evil eye, you can't jinx my dice rolls. If this sort of change seems too drastic or requires altering ability scores or levels, a better option is simply to have the player create a new character. The old character can be used without tinkering in the campaign for which he was created. The new character, more appropriate to your campaign, can develop in your game. Always remember that just because another DM allowed something is no reason you have to do the same. Hopeless characters. At the other extreme from the super character is the character who appears hopeless. The player is convinced his new character has a fatal flaw that guarantees a quick and ugly death under the claws of some imaginary foe. Discouraged, he asks you to scrap the character and create another. In reality, few if any characters are truly hopeless. Certainly ability scores have an effect on the game, but they are not the overwhelming factor in a character's success or failure. Far more important is the cleverness and ingenuity the player brings to playing the character. When a player bemoans his bad luck and hopeless character, he may just be upset because the character is not exactly what he wanted. Some players write off any character who has only one above average ability score. Some complain if a new character does not qualify for a favorite class or race. Others complain if even one ability score is below average. Some players become stuck in super character mode. Some want a character with no penalties. Some always want to play a particular character class and feel cheated if their scores won't allow it. Some players cite numerical formulas as proof of character's hopelessness. A character needs at least 75 ability points to survive, or a character without 2 scores of 15 or more is a waste of time. In reality, there is no such hard and fast formula. There are, in fact, few really hopeless characters at all. Dealing with hopeless characters. Before you agree that a character is hopeless, consider the player's motives. Try to be firm and encourage players to give bad characters a try. They might actually enjoy playing something different for a change. A character with 1 or more very low scores, 6 or less, may seem like a loser, like it would be no fun to play. Quite simply, this isn't true. Just as exceptionally high scores make a character unique, so do very low scores. In the hands of good role players, such characters are tremendous fun. Encourage the player to be daring and creative. Some of the most memorable characters from history and literature rose to greatness despite their flaws. In many ways, the completely average character is the worst of all. Exceptionally good and exceptionally bad ability scores give a player something to base his role-playing on. Whether nimble as a cat or dumb as a box of rocks, at least the character provides something exciting to roleplay. Average characters don't have these simple focal points. The unique, special something that makes a character stand out in a crowd must be provided by the player, and this is not always easy. Too many players fall into the "he's just your basic fighter" syndrome. In truth, however, even an average character is okay. The only really hopeless character is the rare one that cannot qualify for any character class. The playability of all other characters is up to you. Dealing with dissatisfied players. All of the above notwithstanding, you don't want to force a player to accept a character he really doesn't like. All you will be doing is losing a player. If someone really is dissatisfied, either make some adjustments to the character or let him roll up a new one. When adjusting ability scores, follow these guidelines. Don't adjust an ability score above the minimum required to qualify for a particular class or race. You are being kind enough already without giving away 10% experience bonuses. Don't adjust an ability score above 15. Only 2 classes have ability minimums higher than 15, the Paladin and the Illusionist. Only very special characters can become Paladins and Illusionists. If you give these classes away, they lose their charm. Don't adjust an ability score that isn't required for the race or class the player wants his character to be. Think twice before raising an ability score to let a character into an optional character class if he already qualifies for the standard class in that group. For example, if Kurizov has the scores he needs to be a half-elf fighter, does he really need to be a half-elf ranger? Encourage the player to develop a character who always wanted to be a ranger but just never got the chance, or who fancies himself a ranger but is allergic to trees. Encourage role-playing. Wishes and ability scores. Sooner or later, player characters are going to gain wishes. Wishes are wonderful things that allow creative players to break the rules in marvelous ways. Inevitably, some player is going to use a wish to raise his character's ability scores. This is fine. Player characters should have the chance to raise their ability scores. It can't be too easy, however, or soon every character in your campaign will have 18s in every ability. When a wish is used to increase a score that is 15 or lower, each wish raises the ability 1 point. A character with a dexterity of 15, for example, can use a wish to raise his dexterity to 16. If the ability score is between 16 and 20, each wish increases the ability score by only 1/10 of a point. The character must use 10 wishes to raise the dexterity score from 16 to 17. The player can record this on his character sheet as 16.1, 16.2, etc. Fractions of a point have no effect until all 10 wishes have been made. If a character of the warrior group has strength 18, each wish increases the percentile score by 10%. Thus, 11 wishes are needed to reach strength 19. When an ability score is greater than 20, each wish raises it by only 1/20th of a point. This rule applies only to wishes and wish-like powers. Other magical items, manuals, books, etc., and the intervention of greater powers can automatically increase an ability score by 1 point, regardless of its current value. So to reiterate that, if you have a character who has a wish and uses that wish to increase their ability scores, anything 15 or below, once the wish is used, that ability will be increased by a full point. So 14 to 15, 13 to 14, 15 to 16. However, if that ability score is currently above 15, so 16, 17, 18, they need 10 wishes per point to increase that ability score. So somebody with a strength of 16 would need 10 wishes to get to 17. And each wish would be marked on their character sheet as 16.1. Second wish would be 16.2. Third wish would be 16.3. And none of those fractions have any bearing on rolls or ability checks or anything along those lines. The bonuses for these wishes don't take effect until it has become the next full point, so 16 to 17, not 16.3 or 16.4. Additionally, any ability score 20 and above requires 20 wishes to go up 1 point. So from 20 to 21, the first wish would get you to 20.1, then 20.2, and you'd need a full 20 wishes to get from 20 to 21, and so on. Players with multiple characters. Each player usually controls one character, but sometimes players may want or need more. Multiple player characters are fine in the right situation. Once your campaign is underway and players learn more about the game world, they may want to have characters in several widely scattered areas throughout the world. Having multiple characters who live and adventure in different regions allows a lot of variety in the game. The characters usually are spread far enough apart that events in one region don't affect the other. Sometimes players want to try a different class or race of character, but do not want to abandon their older, more experienced characters. Again, spreading these characters out across the world is an effective means of keeping them separate and unique. Whenever possible, avoid letting players have more than one character in the same area. If for some reason players must have more than one character in an area, make sure that they are of significantly different experience levels. Even this difference should keep them from crossing paths very often. If multiple player characters are allowed, each character should be distinct and different. It is perfectly fair to rule that multiple characters controlled by one person must be different classes, perhaps even different races. This helps the player keep them separate in his imagination. If a player has more than one character available, ask him to choose which character he wants to use for the adventure before he knows what the adventure is about. If a single adventure stretches across several playing sessions, the same character should be used throughout. All of the player's other characters are busy with something else during this adventure. Avoid letting players take more than one player character along on any single adventure. This usually comes up when the group of characters assembled for the planned adventure is too small to undertake it safely. The best solution to this problem is to adjust the adventure. Use a different adventure entirely or supplement the party with NPC hirelings. Multiple character problems. Playing the role of a single character in depth is more than enough work for one person. Adding a second character usually means that both become lists of numbers rather than personalities. Shared items. One single player / multiple character problem that needs to be nipped in the bud is that of shared equipment. Some players will trade magical items, treasure, maps, and gear back and forth among their characters. For example, when Phaedra goes adventuring, she takes along Bertram's Ring of Invisibility. Bertram, in exchange, gets the use of Phaedra's Boots of Speed. In short, each character has the accumulated treasure of two adventurers to draw on. Do not allow this. Even though one player controls both characters, they are not clones. Their equipment and treasure is extremely valuable. Would Phaedra loan her boots to a character controlled by another player? How about an NPC? Probably not on both counts. Unless the character is foolishly generous in all aspects of his personality, you have every right, some might call it a duty, to disallow this sort of behavior. Shared information. Information is a much more difficult problem. Your players must understand that the distinction between what they know as players and what their characters know. Your players have read the rules and shared stories about each other's games. They've torn out their hair as the entire party of adventurers was turned into lawn ornaments by the Medusa who lives beyond the Black Gateway. That is all player information. Nor their characters know what happened to the group except this. They went through the Black Gateway and never returned. The problem of player knowledge / character knowledge is always present, but it is much worse when players control more than one character in the same region. It takes good players to ignore information their characters have no way of knowing, especially if it concerns something dangerous. The best solution is to avoid the situation. If it comes up and players seem to be taking advantage of knowledge they shouldn't have, you can discourage them by changing things a bit. Still, prevention is the best cure. And remember, when problems arise, which they will, don't give up or give in. Instead, look for ways to turn the problem into an adventure. Character background. When you look at a completed character, you will notice there are many unanswered questions. Who were the character's parents? Are they still alive? Does the character have brothers and sisters? Where was he born? Does he have any notable friends or enemies? Are his parents wealthy or are they poor? Does he have a family home? Is he an outcast? Is he civilized and cultured or barbaric and primitive? In short, just how does this character fit into the campaign world? There are no rules to answer these questions. The Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide are designed to help you unlock your imagination. The AD&D rules do not presume to tell you exactly what your campaign world will be like. These decisions are left to you. Consider what would happen if the rules did dictate answers to the questions above. For example, suppose the rules said that 50% of all characters came from primitive barbaric backgrounds, and you're running a campaign set in a huge, sophisticated city, the new Rome of your world. Even more ridiculous would be the reverse, where the rules say 50% of the characters are city dwellers and your campaign is set in a barbaric wilderness. Or how would you explain things if 20% of all characters were seafarers and you had set your adventures in the heart of a desert larger than the Sahara? This book provides guidelines and advice about how to create a campaign, but there is nothing that says exactly where this campaign must be set or what it must be like. This does not mean that a character's background shouldn't be developed. Such backgrounds add a lot to the depth and role-playing of your players and their characters. However, it is up to you to tailor character backgrounds to the needs of your campaign. Letting players do the work. Of course, you don't have to do all the work. Your players can provide most of the energy, enthusiasm, and ideas needed. Your task is to provide direction and control. Allow players to decide what kind of people their characters are. One may be a rough nomad, another an over-civilized fop, others homespun farm boys or salty sea dogs. Let the players decide, and then tell them if and how that character fits into your campaign world. When a player says, "My dwarf's a rude and tough little guy who doesn't like humans or elves," you can respond with, "Fine. He's probably one of the Thangor clan from the deep mountain regions." This type of cooperation spurs your creativity and involves the players in your world right from the start. You have to think of answers to their questions and ways to make their desires work in the campaign. They are rewarded with the feeling of getting the characters they want. A carefully worked out character background can do more than just provide emotional satisfaction. It can also provide motivation for the player characters to undertake specific adventures. Just what is a dwarf of the Thangor clan doing outside his clan's mountainous homeland? Is he an outcast looking for some way to redeem himself? Maybe he's a restless soul eager to see the bright lights of the big city and the world. A character can have parents to avenge, long-lost siblings to track down, a name to clear, or even a lost love to recapture. Background can be used to build subplots within the overall framework of the campaign, enriching character descriptions and interactions. Background should not be forced. Do not insist that a player take upon his character a crippled grandmother, 3 sisters stolen by gypsies, a black-hearted rival, and a stain on the family name. Instead, see if the player has any ideas about his character. Not every player will, but the AD&D game depends as much on the player's fantasies as it does on yours. Characters that players are happy with and feel comfortable about will create their own special excitement and interest. Players who are interested in their characters' backgrounds can be a source of creative energy as they offer you a constant stream of new ideas. Problem backgrounds. Certain points of background can and do create problems in campaigns, however. First and foremost of these is nobility, followed closely by great wealth. Problems of nobility. Some players like the idea of their character being Prince So-and-so or the son of Duke Dunderhead. All too often this leads to an abuse of power. The player assumes, somewhat rightfully and somewhat not, that the title endows his character with special privileges. The right to instant income, the right to flaunt the law, the right to endless NPCs, information, and resources. Or worst of all, the right to use clout to push the other members of the party around. This kind of character quickly becomes tiresome to the other players and will constantly find ways to upset carefully planned adventures. Titles can be allowed, but the DM will have to put some controls on noble characters. Easiest and most effective method is to strip the title of all benefits that, by rights, should go with it. The noble character could be the son of a penurious duke. The son may be next in line to inherit the title when his father dies, but he's also in line to inherit his father's debts. Instead of seeking to impress others in public, the poor son might be quite happy to keep a low profile so as not to attract his father's creditors. After all, it's hard to amass a fortune through adventuring when the bill collectors are always on hand to take it away. Likewise, a princely character could be the son of an unpopular and despotic or incompetent king, perhaps even one who was overthrown for his abuses. Such a son might not want his lineage well known, since most of the peasants would have less than happy recollection of his father's rule. Of course, these kinds of manipulations on your part soon become tiresome, both to yourself and the players. Not every duke can be impoverished, nor every throne usurped. Going too far with this strategy will only destroy the validity of nobility and titles in your game. In the long run, it is better for your player characters to begin untitled, with one of their goals being the possibility of earning the right to place a sir or lady before their names. Imagine their pride as you confer this title on their character, and imagine the trials they must have gone through to earn that right. Problems of wealth. Another problem you may have to deal with is a character from wealthy upper-class families. This is often associated with the problem of titles, since the nobility normally is upper class. Such characters, being wealthy, lack one of the basic reasons to go adventuring: the desire to make a fortune. Indeed, they see their own money as a way to buy solutions to their problems. Often they will propose eminently reasonable and, to the DM's carefully planned adventures, quite disastrous schemes to make their adventuring life easier. It is, of course, possible to hire a wizard to construct magical items, and a wealthy first-level character could buy a vast army, but this sort of thing will have undesirable effects on your campaign. There are ways to control these problems while still allowing players the character backgrounds they desire. Think of the real world and how difficult it is to convince family and friends to give you money. especially sizable amounts of cash. You may have a loving family and generous friends, but there are limits. In your campaign, parents may grow tired of supporting their children. Brothers may grow upset at how the character is cheating them out of their share of an inheritance. Sisters may take exception to the squandering of their dowries. Standard medieval custom called for inheritances, land and chattels, to be divided equally among all of a man's sons. This is one reason Charlemagne's empire crumbled after his death. You can use this custom to whittle a wealthy character's purse down to size. Further, families are not immune to the effects of greed and covetousness. Many a tale revolves around the treachery one brother has wrought upon another. A rich character could awaken to discover that his family has been swindled of all it owns. Background as background. A character's background is a role-playing tool. It provides the player with more information about his character, more beginning personality on which to build. It should complement your campaign and spur it forward. Background details should stay there, in the background. What your characters are doing now and will do in the future is more important than what they were and what they once did. So that concludes the first chapter of the Dungeon Master's Guide. I hope all of you followed along in your own book. And what I'm going to do in the next video is a practical demonstration of rolling up a few characters using the 6 methods of rolling up characters, and we will walk through some of the pros and cons of each. Also, we'll walk through some of the rules associated with high and low ability scores and the helpful hints talked about in the Dungeon Master's Guide at the end of that first chapter. So stay tuned, like and subscribe so you get a notification for the next video that I put out. And in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the pros and cons of any of the methods you like to roll up new characters for AD&D 2E. And as a dungeon master, what are some of the methods you use to curtail backgrounds of new characters that might have game-breaking implications? So see you next time. Again, like and subscribe, and keep the adventure going.